What up, everyone? DJ Nubis here. Metal Time Radio. Just got done seeing Morbius not too long ago, and I'm going to do a little review here of that. So quickly, it's another Marvel film in the Marvel universe, and we are being introduced to Morbius, Michael Morbius, and much like Moon Knight that just kicked off on Disney Plus, I'm not at all familiar with these characters. So these are all brand new to me. And I know that people who are far more invested and familiar with the comics are probably going to come out of this film differently than me. Maybe not too much, but definitely if you're more familiar with this character. So basically, you have our main players as far as actors in here. You got Jared Leto playing Michael Morbius, Matt Smith playing Milo/Lucian, Adria Arjona as Martine Bancroft, Tyrese Gibson as Simon Stroud, and Jared Harris as Dr. Emil Nicholas. Now, surprisingly about Jared Harris, I did not know. He's Richard Harris's son, and I really enjoyed Jared in the Sherlock Holmes film, Game of Shadows. He plays a great James Moriarty. It was like a really, really good role for him, and I really enjoyed it. So he's a really good actor, and he's not in here a lot, but he does have some good scenes in here. So basically, your plot is that Michael Morbius and also Milo, as kids, are being looked after by Dr. Emil Nicholas, and they have a rare blood disease. And it really breaks down their body. They can't generate new blood cells, so their life expectancy is not that long. So obviously we deal with some of the issues as they're kids, bullying and everything else. And then as we get them to a modern day where they're older, Michael Morbius has actually created a synthetic, I don't know if it's synthetic or not, but it's an alternative blood that helps people, like just ordinary people, heal. Like somehow he's created this alternative blood type and helps soldiers from Iraq, because we get a reference to that somewhere in the film. I think it's actually Stroud that actually mentions it, but so he's being awarded this award for creating this, alternative medicine, basically. But he's still trying to hunt down how to fix himself and other people like him, like his brother Milo. They're not technically real brothers, but just by a bond there that they become brothers growing up. So basically, Milo has money, or Nicholas it's his money, I'm not sure, but they're sort of supporting Michael's research and everything. So we're very quickly taken to where Michael and Martine Bancroft are on a cargo vessel researching how to do, to create an antidote or a fix for his disease. And at first we're in Costa Rica, and he's like, cutting his hand. They've got this like trap for some. They're going to trap these vampire bats, I guess. And it's probably you saw from the trailer if you've checked it out. So that's kind of where it starts in terms of him getting these bats. And his theory is that to sort of splice DNA and genealogy with creatures and animals is a way to kind of like heal and fix diseases and ailments. Now, Martine Bancroft, she's kind of like, well, if it's done naturally through time, that makes sense. But when you're forcing the issue, you can run into problems. So obviously, Morbius ends up injecting himself with a serum, and it has a dire effect, essentially making him half human, half vampire. Could say a total vampire, but they don't. Obviously, he doesn't burn up in the sun and stuff like that. But we quickly discover on the ship that he's craving blood, like he's kind of losing his shit. He's got bloodlust, and she gets knocked out. But there is a sense of recognizability on his part when he sees her and gets angry at the mercenary gunmen that are protecting him on the cargo ship. So he's like fucking them up left and right, you know. And he ends up jumping off the ship once he figures out she's okay and she's still knocked out. He jumps off the ship and disappears. She ends up in a hospital for a little while, in a coma or just really hurt up kind of bad. She's ends up being fine later, obviously, but in the meantime, Morbius is coming back to the city, and you know he's checking in on her. But they're also Gibson and the other cop that he's with are trying to figure out what happened on his cargo ship because there's nothing but dead bodies on it. And obviously, they're kind of putting things together that these bodies have been drained of blood, you know, something crazy because they're already familiar with the Marvel universe in terms of like crazy creatures and monsters and stuff. So it doesn't really shock them. There's something else out there, but they don't know exactly what they're dealing with. So in the process of Morbius being back in his lab, he's kind of like just checking out his own skills. Like he's figuring out he's got sonar ability, he's got echolocation, and there's a point where he steps into the big holding tank where the bats are at that he had collected, and he's kind of in there, and they're not hurting him. They would hurt other people, normal human beings, but not him. So there's like this connection, and this is going to play a part later that I have a little bit of a problem with, but there's this connection, and they don't hurt him and everything, and so he's learning. He's got certain skills. He's learning to fly. He's very quick, obviously, and one of the things with the CGI is pretty good in terms of that. You know, I don't have a problem with the CGI facial changes or the way that they use them when it's almost like if you ever remember early X-Men films, Nightcrawler, how they kind of did that. It's almost like that, except for they don't quite disappear. They're just very quick, and it's like it is sort of like sporadic. So obviously now with the technology, the CGI is a little better in that regard, and they did a nice job. And I don't know if it's something to be happy about or sad that they kind of colored it up, which is really cool. But I don't know if that's just their way of kind of distracting us from everything, some of the bad shit that happens. But it was really nice to see that. The color schemes are good in this. I liked it. It worked out pretty well with that. As a story itself, for an origin story, it was actually kind of lame. I was not that impressed with it, mainly because it wasn't that original, really, in that terms. I kind of expected a little more, I guess. Just how things played out. I thought the supporting characters in general, like all of them, including Martine Bancroft's character, they were really bland and boring. There was just nobody else stood out. Credit to Leto. I've never been like the biggest fan of his acting per se. I know he's done a vast many things. But if I had to choose between him doing Morbius versus the Joker, Morbius is 10 times better than the Joker. But you know, some of that's not his fault either. But much better character for him with Morbius, obviously, and he's really the only interesting character in the film. But again, you could write this off as bad script writing because this movie was actually quite short. I didn't look up the time for it, but compared to other Marvel movies, usually every other Marvel movie runs over 2 hours. I think this is probably best at an hour and 40 minutes tops, I think. And it might be less than that or a little bit more, but it's not much. It went by really fast. But it's kind of like, as short as it was, it didn't end fast enough for me. I was losing interest in it because of the other characters. They're just not that great. The idea is Milo, his brother, ends up taking the same serum and starts killing people, which at first sets Michael up and he's being arrested. So he's actually been in jail the two cops who have been chasing him, they're like, "We know you did something to yourself." And then, of course, one cop brings in like a little vial of holy water because he's thinking in terms of traditional vampires, and Michael Morbius is just kind of like, "I'm like, dude, come on, really? It's not really real like that." Uh, so Milo is taking us because these guys have both been dealing with this very bad disease that they can barely walk. They need canes. It's and Morbius was using like the two things. Uh, so Milo though has a different reaction altogether to it. Like he's power hungry. Like he's happy to be able to walk. He's happy to be able to be strong. So his reaction, even though Michael Morbius was happy about the way he felt, he was also understanding the very dark side of what it was that he'd become. Milo, on the other hand, just didn't give a shit. Like he would go somewhat pick fights in bars and end up killing the guys that would fuck with him. And for him, it was just a big power trip. So now we have Michael and Milo battling each other, and which was kind of expected. It was the only way I can think of is how even before Milo took it, I was like, well, like once I saw the first interaction between Milo and Michael when they were discussing, because Milo really wanted him to give him the same sermon. Michael's like, I can't do it. But obviously, after Michael left, somehow Milo got a hold of it and took it anyway. I said, well, this is where the first battle is going to come across with these two guys. Towards the end, with the battle with Milo, and I talked about the way that Michael Morbius, was able to control the bats. Similar to what you saw in Batman Begins, only Batman had like some sort of device that gave him the ability to call the bats. But it had a similar feel because that's how Michael was able to call him, like his little echolocation or whatever the fuck it was. So they're battling, and Milo's sort of getting the best of Michael at this point. And so Michael calls the bats, and the tide of the battle starts to change, and he manages to get the bats to sort of like fuck with Milo and like distract him and everything else. And it's a cool thing, but I'm sitting there saying to myself, like, well, Milo's the same thing he is. And the way that Michael explained the relationship with the bats with him was that they considered him like a brother. So that's why they didn't fuck with him. But Milo is still one of them. So part of me is like, well, why wasn't Michael able just to kind of shoosh them away? Like, they're both the same type of vampiric creature. So maybe someone who's a little more familiar with these stories and everything else can explain to me why that was how that played out. It's very possible that they just didn't explain in the movie. Like maybe there's something the audience should know in terms of why Michael's able to do it versus Milo. But that there's like a bit of a hole there with that towards the end of the movie with that. We do get like an Easter egg, a couple of them. Both of them involved Adrian Toomes, who played by Michael Keaton, is also Vulture. The first Easter egg, I'm sorry if I'm spoiling this part of it for you, but it's kind of important just in a sense because I got another question about it. The first one is we catch a glimpse of the nighttime sky where the sky opens up in a purple haze, similar to what we saw from Spider-Man No Way Home. And we know that ultimately that's what happened when Strange was, and Spider-Man were fucking around with the multiverse shit and trying to change time and everything else. So now we've learned that there's still more people coming in from other universes. And of course, Toomes does that. He ends up coming from another universe. Right into jail, in fact. He then ends up in a cell. But for whatever reason, cops let him out, and he's off to do whatever do. Second Easter egg we get is Morbius is driving his car fast down this desert highway, basically, and stops in the middle. It's like 3 a.m. He stops, and then we catch Vulture in his mechanical gear, his wings and everything. He shows up, and Morbius is like, "Why'd you summon me here?" And at this point, Vulture is like, "Well, I don't know how I got here. I think it has something to do with Spider-Man, so I think that we should team up." And Morbius's reaction is, "Well, that's intriguing." Now, my knowledge going into here was Morbius is sort of like the anti-hero, sort of like Venom, right? Not always good, not always bad. But, and it's been a while since I've seen the other two Spider-Man movies. I think it was the first one that Vulture was in. I could have swore that despite Toomes being kind of a good dude in general, like he was bad, like he did bad things. And so like when I first saw this Easter egg, I was under the assumption that they were going to be like this bad team, guys of bad dudes, right? But I was reading up on it, and apparently the explanation with that is that Vulture and Morbius are actually going to be good. Now, Morbius sort of makes sense because Morbius doesn't kill people, or at least tries not to, because that was his big beef with Milo, was that he was killing people just randomly, innocent or not. And Morbius didn't want to do that. So, and of course, like I said, Vulture does have a good side, so someone else can maybe explain again, is Vulture actually a good dude, and does he end up teaming up with Morbius to kind of fight for the side of good? I just don't know much about either character, but I just always kind of assumed that Vulture was kind of the wrong side of everything when it came to Spider-Man, so we'll see how that plays out. As a character, Morbius is okay. As I talked about earlier in this review, I had a chance to catch the first episode of Moon Knight. Now, I haven't seen, obviously, the whole series isn't done for the season on that, but the first episode, I'm very, very interested and intrigued in Moon Knight. If they never did another Morbius film, I wouldn't care. And it'd be a shame because, I want to be able to like a lot of this stuff. I know Neko and I have talked about the oversaturation of this entire fucking thing. Like, Eternals I haven't seen. I have no desire to see it. Something tells me, though, that I probably need to watch it because there's probably going to be shit in there that's connected to everything else that's going on. But I have no desire to watch it. I just know nothing about them. It doesn't even look interesting. And I don't know what to tell you all. Like, Marvel is trying to create this great big world, a universe of characters that we all love, mainly all you diehard comic fans. And, for those that don't, are like me and kind of like just fly by the seat of our pants watching this stuff, if they didn't care about Thor or Iron Man or, Black Widow, whatever, but they're not going to care about Morbius. Now, keep in mind, I went to a 4 o'clock showing, which was the very first showing of this week here in Maryland. So when I was in there, it wasn't a packed house, but it was quite a few people in there for a 4 o'clock showing on a Thursday. So that tells me there is interest, but I'm just wondering if people in general who don't really give a shit about characters they don't know about are going to actually pay attention to this film. And Rotten Tomatoes, the critics are already hammering it. Like, it was like 17%, I think. So, yeah, I don't know. Now, here's the other thing about the Easter eggs with Vulture. This was more of like a wish list that I had, that I talked with other people before this movie came out, because I asked a question to Walter about it, and I would have liked to seen, and maybe it could still happen if they do another Morbius film, I don't know, but I would have liked to see, instead of Vulture, maybe making a connection with Blade, because I know they're working on a Blade film. I know they are. And so if you're going to introduce Blade into the same universe, then what better way to do it than to use vampires? For whatever reason. I mean, I don't know how you would set that up or how it fits into this particular character, because I don't know if they've ever clashed in the comics or anything, but you have the freedom to kind of do this. Like, it isn't so much that you have to follow everything by the book, but because they don't usually do it anyway. So I'm just wondering some of your opinions, like if you actually think that it would have been better off to try to connect Blade into here instead of Vulture. I mean, I know maybe Morbius is connected to Spider-Man in some way. I don't know. Again, you guys would know better than I would, but I don't know, something to ponder. If I had to give this movie a rating, I know there were some comparisons about Venom to it. Venom's only better in the sense that the relationship between Eddie Brock and Venom is kind of comical. So the humor throughout, I didn't get to see Carnage yet, but the first one, the humor is there to kind of alleviate shit. Now, Morbius is a much more serious movie. You don't get those comic relief stuff too much, if at all. And, but I can't remember what I gave Venom as far as a rating. If I rated it at all, I don't remember. Have to go back and rewatch it and just kind of reevaluate it. But if I had to give Morbius a rating, it would probably be 6 out of 10. I was dabbling between 5 and 6. It's just it's only problematic because, again, forget what movie I was discussing. It's all about your characters. Like, even your secondary characters, the supporting characters, need to be interesting on some level. For whatever reason, in Morbius, beyond Leto, it just no one I can care about. Like, there's just no one there. There is a scene with Bancroft later in the movie that I have ideas why it happened. I just not entirely sure. And I'll wait to talk to people when they've seen it to kind of ask them about that, because I'm not going to explore that part of it. But anyway, if you're a Marvel fan, check it out. You might dig it more than me. I don't know. I'm intrigued, as Morbius would say, about the character of Morbius. This does have like the horror action part to it compared to some of the other stuff. So we'll see. And this is sort of why I wanted Blade to be kind of a connection here, but they didn't do that justice for me. Assholes. Anyway, all right. Thank you all. Check it out. Tell me what you think. Later.